worship the Lord. Worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. If we say that we know him, but we don't keep his word, then we walk in the darkness, and the truth's not in us. If we walk in the light, we will have fellowship sweet, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from sin. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light.
Well, good morning, friends. How's everybody this morning? All the way here from Maine down to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Reedville, Virginia. Saying good morning to everybody here. I need more fingers some days. And, but here I am. You've found me here. There you go. And don't you love it when a software company changes software? This is not a complaint. I'm just asking a question. Don't you just absolutely love it? Well, the software company I use to stream all this out to you changed software. So the title, some people may be looking for the title change. I couldn't change it today. I need to go back and figure out. They've changed the whole look of everything. And I fumbled around trying to figure out where you change the title. We'll figure that out and get the title changed. Hopefully people will find us just fine and dandy. And because it says that we're live, and we are. So anything new in your world, any prayer requests that you might have, feel free to put them up and to share them. We certainly want to consider your prayer needs, your prayer concerns, pray with and for one another this morning. We are in this book that you see on the screen behind me, Sacred Pathways, studying about different approaches, different settings in which people feel closer to God. And, we don't tend to think about these things in terms of our spiritual formation, but they are true. Some of us find ourselves feeling more close to God in different circumstances. And we tend to take a one-size-fits-all approach to people and people just need to be like this or like that and do these certain things and you'll be a good Christian. And I think that is quite an overstatement that sometimes people will make. So the study of this book helps us to understand that that people are wired differently. We have different personalities. We have different interests. I mean, it might surprise you to know that not everybody is a Patriots fan. There are people who are that random Eagles fan, and then some of us who are Pittsburgh Steelers fans, even though we got spanked pretty good in the playoff game. But guess what? So did your team if you're a Patriots fan. You might have even gotten spanked even worse than we did. Both of our teams got spanked. Why am I talking about football? I don't know. I have no idea. Dinah, ask you the question, how are your peeps doing? Praying for them and want to be continuing to lift them up before the Lord. I cannot join you with coffee this morning. I would very much like to, but I have a physical exam first thing this morning, and it's just an exam, nothing earth-shattering. Just we've had to. I'm that age where I've had to redo life insurance considerations, and a physical exam is a part of that. When you're asking for $100 million, they want an exam. No, I'm not asking for $100 million. Not even asking for $1 million, actually. Asking for far less than that. But they want to have the physical exam. So no coffee drinking with you. We'll see how my throat holds out. I guess I could have a little bit of water, but we will see. And I'm not even going to get to see my own doctor this morning because the life insurance company has certain doctors that they used for their physical exams. So I will see him here in a few weeks in the beginning of February, and he'll be pleased. He'll go, you put a little weight back on, but not much, just a little bit. Trying to get things back under control here again. It's challenging this time of year, as you know. Won't labor that point. We are at the place where we are talking about the caregiver and people who find themselves in an extraordinarily close feeling with God as they give care to others. Now, that is not everybody. Some people, they don't know what to do. It's so awkward. It's so strange. It's so weird. But some people do really find a sense of connectivity and pleasure and God's pleasure in giving care. Now, in any of the things that we've considered, any of us, regardless of what our wiring might be, could lean into these from time to time to stretch ourselves, or sometimes simply out of obedience. We have where you have a situation in front of you where there's the opportunity to express and give care to someone. And so that is what you do because of the need that's right in front of you. So to practice care out of obedience or out of an act of love, even though this might not be something you might naturally gravitate toward. So it's like caring for a person in a wheelchair. I've had friends along the way. A long time ago, I had a friend named Tom. Tom and Donna were their names. And Tom had diabetes. Tom would become a multi-level amputee. And by that, what I mean is it first started with half a foot, and then it was the whole foot, and then it was half the leg. And, before long, he was amputated up over his knees, actually, sadly for Tom. And Donna did her best to give care for him as long as she was able. But Tom was a tall man and not a small man. And it got to the point where she just couldn't help Tom anymore. And he went into a nursing facility. And he needed to have the full-time care simply because he couldn't even get out of bed. And Tom would have problems from time to time. And little accidents and things like that. And, people who are caregivers, they'll no problem. Other people will go, oh, I just don't want to deal with your crap, literally. And, but some people, they don't think a thing of that at all. Toward the end of Tom's life, he wanted me to come in and rub his back. Donna was out of the picture, and she needed to be able to take care of herself and had to move away for some work. And so I would go in and just rub Tom's back. And while I rubbed Tom's back, I appreciated being able to demonstrate that type of care for Tom. But me, as a busy person, always thinking I've got X, Y, and Z different types of things I need to go and do and teach and call and so on and so forth. And so while I would do that, it was a demonstration of love and an act of obedience, but it wasn't something that was a turn off to me. Not that you're trying to be turned on by something like that, but it wasn't something that I despised and didn't like, but neither was it something that I would naturally gravitate toward doing something like that. And there have been different measures along the way, people hospitalized, walking people on the journey through death's door, and being there in those types of settings. Again, it may not be the place I would naturally gravitate. I can do it. And so we're going to be examining and evaluating this morning the pathway of being a caregiver. So get into the book here a little bit. Who were caregivers? I mean, if I were to ask you to name a foremost famous caregiver, who might come to your mind? There are people historically that are noted for the care that they give to other people. And who might come to your mind as you think about who might be that caregiver? How about Mother Teresa? Yeah, there you go. Fran has it. Mother Teresa, the person who took care of Helen Keller. There's another example of that type of a caregiver. Mother Teresa would look behind the eyes of the poor, the sick, the needy, and she said she saw the image of God. She saw God in that place of suffering, in that place of need. Mother Teresa learned to love God by loving other people. Now, I'm not here to debate, the efficacy of Mother Teresa's spiritual standing with Jesus. That's not what I'm here to do, because some people might say, well, I'm not sure of her salvation. She made comments from time to time that, okay, laying all that aside, I'm saying that because I know that we have people who listen who would maybe go down that road just on the simple side of caring for people, and would run toward that care of people. And she would be a foremost person that would do that type of thing. Sometimes we feel put out when we think of someone asking us to care for them. Now, there are people, we can be abused, and we can be misused, and we can be used, and I'm not talking that type of situation. I'm talking a situation where there's that legitimate need, where someone really largely cannot function on their own, and they need assistance, they need help. That's what I'm talking about. And now maybe you are a caregiver giving care to someone else, and certainly it's true. Caregiving isn't a chore for these people. Caregiving is an act of worship. Caregiving isn't a chore. It is a demonstration of love. Some people have found that one of the most profound ways we can love God is to love other people and to think about that ourselves. Now, people who are martyrs, who want all kinds of attention because of the fact that they give care to other people, that may not be driven by love. That may be driven by some other ulterior motive. But to make sure that in our giving of care to other people, that what we're doing, what we're expressing is driven by a heart of love, God's love for those individuals. That is an important piece of the puzzle for all of us. Now, let me list out for us some biblical examples of caregivers. There are a few, and we have exhortations to love other people. Sometimes caregivers become prophets. Sometimes there are some temptations that caregivers have. And I just want to tell you, I'm not prepared completely this morning because of the software issue I was trying to fight with. I don't have things on the screen that I might like to have up there for you. So, one, how about, can you name a book of the Bible that really doesn't talk about God? Interestingly, it's while it's all about what God did, it doesn't really talk a lot about God. Can you think of a book of the Bible where there's not much mention? And that might be surprising to some of you, that there's a book of the Bible where there isn't a lot of talk about God, but it does highlight a person who was a caregiver and how this person served not only one individual, but ended up serving a whole nation of people in what they did. Some of you are scratching your heads. Maybe a few are rubbing your beards. I don't know if any of you, I think Walter, maybe a little beard there, a little goatee maybe. How about Esther? The book of Esther. You got it. There we go. Esther is the book. And you can go back and read through it. And God did deliver the people, but, there really isn't much in the story that references God directly. But the book of Esther is that example. And the person who gave care to Esther, her parents had died, was her uncle Mordecai. Now, there's all kinds of ways that you can say that. Mordecai. I've heard it said different ways, but Mordecai would be the person. The portrait of Mordecai in the book of Esther is that of a man who deeply and profoundly cares about others and freely pours out his energy to help them. In Esther chapter 2, we see Mordecai raising young Esther. Let me put that up on the screen so that you can see it. There we go. Verse 7, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and features, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. It says, when the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted Haggai, who had charge of the harem. The girl pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food, assigned to her 7 maids selected from the king's palace, and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. So this is Esther, but Mordecai was the one, or Mordecai was the one who had been taking care of her and nurturing her and bringing her along. And we see this. I mean, you see it with people perhaps who do foster care. Perhaps they have a wiring of care. Now, some people maybe do it for other reasons, and we'll talk about that maybe toward the end of this broadcast if I get that far this morning. But some just love kids, and so they will foster kids. They will adopt kids because they simply love kids. Some, it's care for the elderly who are in a place that need that immense type of care. And when you try to align the wiring of your heart with your career, with your occupation, I mean, some people will find themselves in that position, like our friend Walter here, who deals in that type of caregiving, and then to be a caregiver of a person or of persons, perhaps with dementia, and that don't remember your name, or who become agitated or angry, but yet you just continue to give care and give love. But to take the caregiving from just giving care to the person to asking the question, how do I see and how do I experience God in this circumstance? But you can read more about Mordecai. Read through the book of Esther to see how he gave care to her and how he gave care to an entire nation as they were being threatened. Thomas writes this. Gary Thomas says, "It always amazed me how true caregivers, shepherds, become lions if need be to carry out their mission. Though a caregiver, Mordecai was obviously not a weak man. He could be forceful, even with those whom he loved deeply when circumstances require that he be firm." So being a caregiver doesn't necessarily mean that one be weak, that one be incapable, that one just gets walked over. Sometimes good caregivers know how to put people in their place in a very direct kind of way. The last verse in the book of Esther speaks, as it were, an epitaph of Mordecai, or Mordecai, however you choose to say it. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews and held high esteem by his many fellow Jews because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of the Jews. I didn't put that up so you could see it. There it is. Again, Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. So even in that verse, it doesn't say that, he found himself filled with pride because of his high position. I mean, he got this number 2 rank, and it's interesting. Mordecai is one of those people. Joseph was one of those people. Daniel got a very high rank among foreign officials, among foreign leaders. Joseph in Egypt, Daniel in Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar, Mordecai under King Xerxes, kind of the same trend of that prophetical era that takes place there when Xerxes was king. But he doesn't become pompous. He doesn't become arrogant. He just continues doing what he is doing in caring for people. Can you think of another biblical character, New Testament character, who perhaps was preeminent in the demonstration of care for other people? Now, any come to mind? Preeminent, perhaps, among caregivers? How about Jesus? Jesus, a preeminent caregiver. So many times reaching out his hand and touching those that others would not touch, touching the leper, healing the leper, helping the leper. Jesus reaching out and touching the blind and the deaf and the mute, and even the dead. Jesus doing those very things. We see him as a preeminent caregiver. Now, as I say that, I need to just say one other thing. He didn't care for everybody. It's not that he didn't care, but he didn't have opportunity, perhaps, or the time to demonstrate care to everybody who needed to have care. Sometimes those people who are wired to give care feel like they've got to care for everybody and take care of everybody's problems. And it becomes sort of a messiah complex that I'm going to help everyone and save everyone. And we just can't do that. A wise caregiver realizes that there's only a certain number of hours in a day and a certain amount of emotional capacity to be able to minister to the needs and to the cares of other people. And Jesus did not meet the needs of everyone directly in that way, because he had other things that he had to do in giving care, proclaiming the gospel, preaching, traveling, going to more places. Those were all part of what he had to do. And I relate with Jesus in that way. My scope is become increasingly larger with more and more demands, and realizing what can I do, what can I not do. In fact, I was just talking to Sue and Jacob here in the office about a person that really is looking, somebody outside the church looking for care, but they're looking for a level of care I cannot offer to them. And for me, I need to be able to just say to that person, which I'll do today, I'll engage them in some conversation, but I need to say, look, I'm not your person. I need to connect you with somebody else who perhaps doesn't have as many demands. And I'm not trying to make myself, I feel badly. I don't have the time to get to this person's needs as much as they think they need. And that was Jesus as well. And that's where he multiplied ministers and other caregivers. We read about Jesus in Matthew chapter 14. Let me take you there. It says, when Jesus heard what happened, he withdrew by a boat privately to a solitary place. Here's Jesus in the solitude. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd. He had compassion on them and healed their sick. And out of this, we will see him going on and feeding the several thousand people, and feeding the 5,000, as revealed here in the header. You could go back to Matthew chapter 9. Let me take you back there, and again see Jesus' response to the people. Jesus' response down here in verse 35, when Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus' responsiveness to people who had these needs. So, I could say Jesus was the penultimate caregiver, if you would consider him in that way. And there are other caregivers that we read about in the scriptures that they ran toward giving care. And yet, back in these chapters, we read about the disciples enamored by the crowds. They liked all the crowds of people that were there for healing and for care. And Jesus knew perhaps the motives of their heart, that, look, you're just liking it. This is now a big show, and you like the big show. I'm not here for that. I'm here to give real care to real people. And so Jesus calls out in form, perhaps a form of hypocritical compassion. And we have to guard against hypocritical compassion. A hypocritical compassion is the compassion we have because we think it will make us look good, and other people be impressed and ooh and ah. I mean, ultimately, a good caregiver is one that you don't know is running around caring for people. And we have a few of those that I know of here in our body. They don't go out for fanfare. They don't want everybody knowing. In fact, sometimes you're surprised when you find out just all that they have been doing. Caregivers often will place their own needs underneath the needs of other people. He had an important mission to accomplish than anybody that ever lived, and yet he still found time to care for the basic needs of the sick, the hungry, and the unruly crowd. Now I want to show you the tension that Jesus had to face in Mark chapter 1. I'll take you there down toward the end of the passage. And I mean, there can be some reciprocal care. Down at verse 29, it says, as soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and the demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door. Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons. But he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. But we see him ministering to Simon's mother-in-law, was in bed with a fever. Maybe she had COVID. I doubt it. And they told Jesus about her. And he went to her, took her hand, helped her up. And how often did Jesus, in his meeting of needs, actually care for people and touch them as he did? It says the fever left her. She began to wait on them. So it was a win-win. She won that she was healed. Jesus won and that he got some pizza that night. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus the sick. They heard about what he had done at the synagogue. They heard what he had done for Simon's mother-in-law. And so now the crowd of the town is coming out to Jesus. Verse 35 continues, though. It says this, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, went to the solitary place. Here is this idea of the solitary, of solitude that we've talked about already. It says where he prayed. Prayer is a component of what happens in the place of solitude. It says Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, everyone's looking for you. But notice Jesus' reply. Let us go somewhere else to nearby villages so I can preach there also. That is why I have come. So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. Going somewhere else. And this is somewhat of the wrestling match that sometimes a person like myself can have. There are more needs to meet than can be met, more demands. People have more. But what is the ultimate mission? And to remember the mission, and for me, in my case, to remember the first calling of the gospel, of teaching and of preaching and of equipping. And we have people among us who are tremendous caregivers, who not only are wired to find the pleasure of God in giving care to other people, but also are gifted in the giving of that care. Some of us care it's like, if I take a meal, you can expect it's not going to maybe look all garnished up and look great. It might be edible, hopefully. Other people, if they bring in a meal, they might bring it on a platter that's fancy and looks nice, and they say presentation is everything. And well, look, I'm here to make sure you have some food, while they're here to make sure you have food that looks good too. So see the difference there? Might not be my area of gifting. So, but Jesus calls out the people. We like to define holiness by avoiding things, by avoiding various transgressions. But in God's book, the sin of omission, not doing the good that we should do, ranks up there with the sin of commission. So it isn't just a case of what we commit that is wrong, but it's what we omit that is right, the right things that we need to do. For him who knows to do good and does it not, for him it is sin. So in that fashion, in that way, we are all called to give a certain measure of care to other people. Here are some activities that caregivers might involve themselves in: adopting a prisoner, helping a friend through a personal crisis, lending money, helping someone battling substance abuse, volunteering on a rescue squad, helping an illiterate person learn to read, donating time at a battered women's shelter, counseling at a pregnancy center, working in a soup kitchen, fixing someone's car, repairing a house, making recordings for the blind, researching a cure for disease, helping someone configure his computer system, watching the children of some tired parents so they can have a break, providing budgeting counseling for someone struggling to manage their money. There's a book called The Conspiracy of Kindness that suggests mixing service and evangelism. That you go out and you do these very things to people or toward people, perhaps that are not Christians yet. Caregivers can be prophets. They win the right to be heard. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you fill in the blank. You know what it says. They do not care how much you know until they know how much you care is the blank. But as you give care, you win the right to speak into people's lives in ways that other people don't win. So to lean into that caregiving and then seeking the opportunity to speak to somebody in maybe a prophetic kind of way, because you have given to people that type of care. You've won the right to be heard. Christians who demonstrate, I'm going to read this from page 159 from Thomas' book. Christians who demonstrate compassion because they are passionately in love with God will thus speak prophetically to a selfish culture and sometimes a selfish church. Selfishness distorts true sacrifice, and sacrifice is at the heart of true care. Mother Teresa said, "Real love is always painful and hurts. Then it is real and pure." We have to pass through the pain of sacrifice before we experience the joy of obedience. Prophetic caring necessitates that we are caring out of love for God and caring for others because we know God loves us and because we know God loves them so very much. The importance of care. Caregiving can become a sacred pathway when we settle ourselves, when we bring ourselves to a place of patience. A few dangers of being a caregiver. Caregiving can be a temperament that some people have. We express our love to God by reaching out to other people, but it can become a disease as well. Jesus knew when he could give care. Jesus knew when he needed to get away to a solitary place. Jesus knew when he needed to move on to the next ministry. That's what Jesus knew how to do. Some of us, though, we will make ourselves ungodly sick in trying to care for other people. We'll make ourselves crazy. We'll make ourselves insane. We'll make ourselves emotionally unhealthy and unbalanced because we haven't learned to give that care out of God's love. We're giving that care perhaps out of our love and haven't learned how to put a governor on just exactly how much we can do. So much so that sometimes people end up going to therapy. One therapist said, I really hate when women get involved in volunteer organizations to take care of the great unwashed because they're taking care of business in their own lives. We do terrible things to people who already have enough problems without wanting them to also meet our needs. And so sometimes we do it, I hate saying this, but I will. I have known a number, and this isn't a rule, okay? But I've known a number of people who are counselors and therapists who are train wrecked themselves. And sometimes people go into that realm to help other people because in helping others, it helps themselves maybe, and maybe not. I mean, I worked with a couple one time that counseled couples, and yet they were all the time coming to me because of their own fights and their own weaknesses and their own problems, which I'm glad for that. But yet I do look for those counselors who seem like they mostly have it together and maybe have worked through their issues. But sometimes we go into caregiving to make ourselves feel better more than the fact that we're really there to care for someone else. We can serve others in order to serve ourselves. Sometimes people end up serving wealthy people. You look and go, okay, you're all the time buttering up, cuddling up, snuggling up to wealthy people, getting to know them when they're in the latter phases of their life because you just want their money. And I've heard people make that accusations about other people. And yet that may not be the case, but there can be that appearance of that situation. I've had people say that to me, not about me, but about other people. Yeah, there they go again. They're snuggling up to that rich person, hoping to get some of their money. Again, that might not be true, but we have to be on guard about, are we serving ourselves by serving other people? It's not always necessarily totally wrong, but we have to determine there's a line that you don't want to cross there. And we ourselves can be helped in helping other people. Another danger, another warning to those who are caregivers is caregivers can neglect the people closest to them. You can be a great caregiver to everybody else in the community, but neglect your own family. You can neglect your own husband, your own wife, your own kids. And this is a real danger. And a young father must learn that changing the world begins with changing a diaper in his own household. And that's something that needs to happen. So those are just a few of the warnings that there are for those who are caregivers. Now, again, my apologies to you. I do not have on the screen because of a software issue I had this morning. I'm going to read these for you. And perhaps tomorrow morning I will first thing put these up on the screen and you'll have the opportunity to see them, I hope. But here they are. Evaluating 0 means not at all, 5 means strongly so, and then you have the range in between. There are 6 areas. You are rating each area 0 to 5 as I read them to you. I feel closest to God when I see him in the needy, the poor, the sick, the imprisoned. I feel God's presence most strongly when I'm sitting quietly by the bed of someone who is lonely or ill or dying, or when I take a meal to someone in need. You can count on me to offer a ride or to volunteer for activities that help other people. Now, don't say 5 if it's like, no, I don't like doing that, but I know I need to do that. If this is something like I really would, that's where I really find a sense of the presence of God, put the 5. Otherwise, I might say, yeah, I would do it, then I'd be happy about it, but it wouldn't be my first pick. Give yourself a 1. Number 2, I grow weary of Christians who spend their time singing songs while a sick neighbor goes without a hot meal or a family in need doesn't get help fixing their car. In other words, this person is listening to their Christian radio and reading their Bible and reading their books and listening to their podcast, and yet somebody has a need and they don't do anything of it. And if you're a person who grows weary of Christians who spend their time doing those things, then you would give yourself a higher score. Next, the words service and compassion are appealing to me. Again, give yourself the score 0 to 5, 0 being not at all, 5 being highly so. Number 4, I sense God's power when I'm counseling a friend who has lost a job, preparing meals, or fixing the car of a family in need, or spending a week at an orphanage in Mexico. You sense God's power in those situations. A book entitled 99 Ways to Help Your Neighbor would be appealing to me. And lastly, I would rather nurse someone to health or help someone repair their house than teach an adult Sunday school class, go to a prayer and fasting retreat, or take a lonely walk in the woods. So how did you rank? When I ranked myself, I ranked 11. I mean, I have some sense, sometimes in some of these situations, when I engage myself in the situation, I do get the sense of God's power. But friends, this isn't me. I am not a caregiver. I can maybe give care, maybe if there's a comparative, maybe better than some people do, but it's not what I run toward. I would rather run toward teaching. I would rather run toward organizing and that type of thing. Now look at Christy. I mean, Christy has an almost perfect score. So Christy, what that would indicate to you is an area to gravitate toward in service and also in allowing yourself to enjoy the presence of God in the giving of care to other people. Now, I have an interesting question that comes to my mind. So far, Christy has responded 29, Priscilla 22, Jessica 26, Fran 26. I wonder if we were to do a survey like this with a larger population of men and women, if we would find, in fact, and I'm not saying this in a chauvinistic way, but we would find, in fact, that women do have a greater propensity toward giving care than do men. That may or may not be the case. Walter is 19. I mean, so Walter's still over the halfway point. Walter is one that's interesting. Walter is we considered some of those considerations. It kept mentioning fixing a car, and Walter fixed a lot of cars in his day at LBC when he was trying to minister to college students in that way. I ranked 11. That's where I ranked. So just an interesting question of is that more in the makeup of the female gender than it is in the male gender to give that type of care? Now, there are people, there are women, this wouldn't be their thing at all. There are men that would be maybe ranked really highly in this. So it isn't just necessarily about the gender, but I wonder, generally speaking, if more women would kind of gravitate this direction than men. Which I think you're right. I mean, lower averages with men probably is probably the case in this area. So, but hopefully this was helpful. I again apologize. I couldn't get these things up on the screen for you this morning, just with some technical trouble that I had. But you got the point, and you got to do some evaluation. Tomorrow, I will try to put these up on the screen at the very beginning so that you can consider them. Again, tomorrow we'll talk about the enthusiast. We only have a few left. We've got the enthusiast, the contemplative, and the intellectual. And then we'll talk about tending to the garden of our own soul next week. Today is Wednesday. Today is not Wednesday. Today is Thursday already. And I'll be shooting out to Augusta here shortly. I've got an international call with somebody in Sudan. Then to Augusta, then to Bangor, and some meetings with some different folks up there, church folk and seminary folk. And So I just pray God's blessings on your day today. Lord, help us all to give care when it is necessary. Help us to do it willingly, in the love of God, as the needs arise. Lord, for those who are caregivers, help them to find fulfillment in the giving of care to other people. And for those of us who maybe don't gravitate that way, help us to stay out of the way of the caregivers and not try to give messy care when others could give great care. Lord, help us today to live with you, to walk with you, to draw close to you, to glorify you in all that we do. Be glorified in our lives, Lord Jesus, we pray. Amen. Have a good day, everyone. I will see you tomorrow.